morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Now, earlier this week, that Empire magazine issue came out focusing on Batman v Superman. And I had a number of you ask me when I was going to discuss the contents of that article and the pictures that were released. And what was taking me so long? Well, the real issue is that I felt that it was a wasted publicity opportunity for Warner Brothers because of two things. One, the timing. It was hard to compete with the huge splash they made at Comic-Con just mere weeks ago. And also because it's so early on in the ad campaign overall for the film, it doesn't come out until March 2016, they really couldn't divulge a lot of new information, right? I mean, they have to keep some things for closer to the actual release date. So I think that it really wasn't an exciting publicity piece. Even the photos were, either we'd seen them before from the trailers, they were just stills from scenes that were shown in trailers already, and they were like one or two behind the scenes pictures, like basically Ben Affleck dressed as Batman at the water cooler. So I didn't really think there was a lot to discuss there until yesterday, when it came to my attention that they discussed, the shooting dates that were coming up that had been revealed in the article. But that's kind of like the noise at the front of what I think is the more interesting part of the story. But I think that the real heart of it is you can see the creative relationship that's starting to develop over at the DC Extended Universe. I think that's what you guys say it's supposed to be called. I just think it sounds better, again, as the DC Cinematic Universe, because, it is supposed to correlate with Marvel to some degree. It's not like, you call Marvel Comics and DC Comics two different things, right? They're both comic books, and these are both cinematic universes. But anyway, I think that there's a very interesting gem of information here that I think is still not a huge headline, but speaks to the artistic aspects of what's being developed over here at Warner Brothers, which could end up being their secret weapon, a high level of artistry. So what am I talking about? Well, the article outlined that Wonder Woman is about to start shooting in fall 2015, so that's very soon. That's why Chris Pine just finalized his deal to play Steve Trevor. And when you hear it, a Gal Gadot movie co-starring Chris Pine, directed by Patty Jenkins of Monster fame, that does seem like a little bit of a tough sell. Highly artistic, but let's see how that materializes. And then they said that Justice League will start shooting in spring 2016, right about when Batman v Superman hits theaters, which is kind of the 1-2 punch that you see coming from Marvel. For instance, when Avengers Age of Ultron came out, right after they started shooting Captain America 3 Civil War. So, I think that's a good way to keep the momentum going. Like, oh, you enjoyed this movie? Well, get excited for this one, which we just started shooting. And the talent can talk about that when they do the press for the current movie hitting theaters, etc., etc. And both those movies, by the way, are 2017 releases. But here's where things started to get really interesting. Patty Jenkins noted that she watches the dailies from the Suicide Squad shoot every day. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, dailies are the raw footage which is shot each day. And what happens is that that's put on, it's made available for, it used to be put on like VHSs or DVDs, but I would imagine now with everything so digital that it's just uploaded to a central server. And that way everyone associated with the film, be they the producer of Suicide Squad, Kevin Tsujihara, head of Warner Brothers, and even someone like Patty Jenkins can log in and watch and see how the film is developing. It's a way to keep tabs on a movie. So when a movie goes horribly off the rails, that's one of the reasons it's so hard to believe. It's like, haven't you been watching the dailies? Now, sometimes a very, very, successful and powerful director can keep people from watching the dailies, but that's rare for obvious reasons. You want to see how a movie is progressing and beginning to take shape. But it's raw, again. No visual effects, hasn't been edited. It's just all the takes. But it's giving Patty Jenkins an idea of what David Ayer is creating. And then they also said they're working on prepping the Aquaman script right now for James Wan. And what I liked about this is it really came across as like an artistic community where, Warner Brothers has gotten all these really talented and artistic and like-minded individuals and put them in a room together, so to speak, and said, figure this out, right? It's almost like, in the old days with NASA, and they were like, okay, here's our best and brightest minds. Or when you watch The Imitation Game, they're like, break this code. It's like, here's a bunch of talented people, we're going to leave you alone, give you sandwiches, now get to it. Also, when you think about the way, if you saw Saving Mr. Banks, the way Mary Poppins was developed into a movie, where they put their screenwriters, the producer, the songwriting duo, the Sherman Brothers, and P.L. Travers in a room together and said, figure it out. And, Walt Disney would occasionally check in and see how it was developing, like watching dailies. So how does this differ from Marvel's strategy? Well, Marvel has Kevin Feige as the point person and everybody goes through him. He's like the gatekeeper to the MCU because he's a big comic book fan. And that could, I feel maybe end up being detrimental in the long run to the MCU, right? Is he almost like the William Randolph Hearst, or the fictional version of William Randolph Hearst, Citizen Kane to the MCU. If he has to approve everything and he has to be the big idea man, and he's the one who knows how it all fits together, is he really getting the best out of the talent that he's hiring? And as you know, Marvel is not getting along with very artistic talent and is really trying, right now at least, seems to be skewing towards people who are better soldiers and are willing to, march to Feige's beat. So I'm just curious to what you think of the way the two different, not only the way the cinematic universes are developing, but what do you think of the way behind the scenes they're developing and their different approaches to creating these properties? The other thing that I did like about the Empire magazine shoot is that, or magazine release, is that the secondary cover that was on the inside was of their alter egos of Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent. I liked that so much. I find alter egos and supporting characters in comics fascinating, and I almost would have preferred that was the main cover to the magazine, Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne. And I'm very curious to see how they're explored in the movie, and one of the things I'm most excited about with Batman v Superman is the exploration of secret identities. And maybe we'll see if this continues into the Wonder Woman movie with her Diana Prince identity, and also what they do with that when they establish the character, or at least introduce the character, in Batman v Superman. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day, I've got non-comic book stories for the next two, for those of you who would like a little break. And the next one focuses on It Follows, which, by the way, I finally watched last weekend. I have to say, I didn't love it. It has a twist at the end. I wouldn't even call it a twist. I would say the movie tried to figure out how to end, but it set it up to it gave itself kind of an impossible task, and I think it really had a non-ending, and it kind of put me in the position where I was like, I wasted my time watching this movie, but did I? Not if I was a Hollywood executive, because I think that the director here, David Robert Mitchell, did such a phenomenal job that I haven't seen anyone debut at this level of talent since Duncan Jones with Moon a couple of years ago. And as you might recall, I sang his praises for months, but still nobody watched Moon. It didn't do very well at the box office, and neither really did It Follows for all the buzz that it got. Maybe it will do well in streaming. But it was made for a little under $1 million, which is a great budget to work with at this level of someone's career. And it made $14.7 million at the box office total. Not great, but a solid return. Not Blum, Jason Blum level, with his horror films. And one of the reasons that James Wan is so successful in working on Aquaman is he got a lot more money. But Dave, and maybe that twist ending did hurt the film, overall in terms of really getting mainstream appeal. But nevertheless, despite some of the flaws with It Follows from a story standpoint, and he was the writer, but anyway, on a side note, I just want to say, I thought the movie got so creepy and weird toward the end that I think that also hurt it. I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but there's something, when the entity finally gets someone and there's like some weird Oedipal subtext, not subtext, it's overtly Oedipal. I was just like, man, it reminded me of one of the only funny lines in Get Hard when Will Ferrell was like doing his sad dog face and he's like, please don't rape me, I'm already too sad. And I was just like, this is already a horrible horror movie, we're all scared for the victims. Do you have to add that layer of just absolutely, horrible obsceneness to this? And I guess, David Robert Mitchell was like, yes, I do. But anyway, why do I think it was so well directed? I think that, we've talked lately about Southpaw being very TV-like. I talked about Beasts of No Nation yesterday. I didn't think the trailer was filmic enough. And I think that, some people said, well, what do you mean by that? And what's the difference? Well, go watch It Follows, which is a fantastic example of style over substance, right? And these other properties are substance over style. And you really shouldn't have either situation. You should really have a nice mix of substance and style. You shouldn't favor one over the other. But David Robert Mitchell's style is something else. He's an incredibly talented director. His camera work is incredibly impressive. The way he lets something breathe and develop and the tension that's there just through old-fashioned cinematography and filmmaking is really impressive. But also the use of the soundtrack. It's really good. It's like Chariots of Fire, kind of like Blade Runner, that kind of like digital music, and it gives the movie a little bit of a timeless feel, and it's really unique and interesting. Something's being done to similar effect back with Steven Soderbergh's The Nick on Cinemax. Season 2 starts October 16th. If you haven't seen Season 1, what are you waiting for? But you know, that is like one of the best soundtracks I've heard in recent memory, and that's a story that takes place like in the 1800s but has a techno soundtrack. And it really, the juxtaposition is actually brilliant. And I would say this was a similar situation here. So David Robert Mitchell, why am I even talking about him? Well, he has another movie that he's working on, and that's why he's in the news. It's kind of like under wraps, and it's like something that's just a murmur, but I wanted to put it on your radar. And actually, the whole reason it surfaced was because he's part of a deal with a production company that's starting to get a lot of attention called Gray Matter. And this is a company that's a production company started by a movie executive turned independent producer. He said he wanted to make movies, not just oversee them for the studio. His name is Lawrence Gray, so he's named, that's why the name of the production company is Gray Matter, like, you know, with the brain. I think that's a pretty darn good name for a production company. And I also think with today's, you know, very intellectual blockbusters, like the era that Christopher Nolan started, I think that that's going to be a very fan-friendly production company name and logo. But anyway, Lawrence Gray got this guy's next movie. He made a preemptive deal to buy the film rights to David Robert Mitchell's follow-up, which is going to have a bigger budget, slightly bigger, but bigger, and it's not going to be a horror movie, which I think is a bit of a mistake, actually. I think he should have done something that at least had horror elements, because, you know, that's the brand he's developing. It's hard to skip around, you know. If you have a success with It Follows, which is a horror movie, you want to make sure that the horror audience, which so appreciated the film that you made, shows up for your second film, right? But if it's not a horror movie, it's less likely they're going to show up. You know, you have to build. So we'll see, though. I reserve judgment till I hear more about it. But I do think it's interesting that David Robert Mitchell decided to make another small film rather than be swept up into a franchise. But, you know, Duncan Jones, who I said was the last person I saw debut with this level of talent in the indie domain, had a very hard time getting a mainstream gig. He did Source Code, which was semi-mainstream, and he was almost the director of Man of Steel, but he lost out to Zack Snyder, who was a company man for Warner Brothers. And then he ended up eventually with Warcraft, which has become this huge albatross around his career because it's taking so long to actually get released. So we'll see what happens to Duncan Jones, and we'll see what happens to David Robert Mitchell. But I'm curious to what you think of his follow-up. What do you think of, you know, what do you think of It Follows? What do you think of it as the style? And what do you think of the whole style over substance or versus substance discussion? All right, so now the third story of the day is a business story, which I think is going to, it's like kind of like the, you know, again, I talked about the canary in the coal mine yesterday. By the way, I think this was hilarious. I was talking about comics and video games, and, you know, a really shattered audience, you know, in terms of the source material, of what the audience views the source material to be. And someone said, "Don't worry, Grace, about the canary. If it dies, we'll just put it in the Lazarus pit. You know, thumbs up if you get the reference." And then someone responded and said, "Grace might not get that reference because she doesn't watch Arrow, so she probably doesn't know what you're talking about." And that blew my mind. I was like, wow, if you think that Arrow created the Lazarus pits, like, that's just like so symbolic of what's happening with DC Comics and just comic books in general, where people are coming into the medium or the characters from different mediums and not being educated as to the history of DC Comics, right? So, and I think people are so possessive, right? I mean, because it was like an aggressive comment, like, Grace should watch Arrow, and how dare she not watch Arrow? And it's like, you know, like, you know, instead of just being like, I think that's an Arrow reference, right? Like, it's been in the comics for years, decades, and that's where Arrow got it from. So, again, I really do see it like as I said, a fracture here in terms of what people view the source material to be. And if you have different ideas of what the source material is, you're going to have very different ideas about what something that's sticking to the source material is, right? So I just find this whole thing fascinating, and I'm really curious to see how it develops going forward. So anyway, what's this business story? Well, the business story has to do, so I said it was a canary in a mine. So what's the mine and what's the canary? Well, just like, you know, music has essentially become free, and artists, you know, musical artists have to make their money from live performances, charging for that, and, you know, also commercials and endorsements, etc. And just like, you know, CDs went away in general, and, you know, no record stores don't exist, and bookstores are going away. I think that movie theaters are on the cusp of that downward slide into oblivion. What makes me say that? Well, Paramount is launching a video-on-demand platform that they're very excited about, and they've actually talked some theater owners into agreeing to it, but some have not, namely Regal. Regal is very against this plan, but AMC and Cineplex have signed on, as have some other smaller chains. And so far, Paramount's got about 30% of the country covered with this plan. So what is it? Well, Paramount wants to take small movies that they feel have a very short shelf life in theaters, like Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension, which is coming out soon, and they want to have a window of just 17 days between when it hits theaters and when it's available to stream. That's the shortest window yet. Usually it's about, 3 months. So they want to shorten it to just a 17-day window, which is mere weeks. And then for the first 90 days that that movie streams, they're going to do a rev share deal with the movie theater chains to, to make sure that the theaters don't feel like they've been left out of the revenue. Now, why do I think this is like the beginning of the end? Well, here's the thing. If you could just be 3 weeks behind the current release schedule, but you could watch movies from the comfort of your own home without having to worry about anybody talking, without having to worry about anybody having their phone on, without having to worry about being shot, with being able to watch the movie whenever you want, to be able to eat whatever you want, pause it if you have to go to the bathroom, have a great seat, not have to worry about any of that, not have to worry about a dirty theater or a dirty restroom at the theater. What would you do? I think that a large number of people would just stick out the 17 days and watch it at home. So I think that, these people, the theater chains, are trying very hard to figure out what this new brave world is in terms of, enjoying content. And as the digital age becomes more prevalent, I think cable is also coming to an end very soon as well. It's going to take a little bit of time. We might be talking about 10 years here, but I think it's happening slowly. Like you can see it, you can see evolution happening before your eyes. And I think plans like this are very detrimental to the theaters. But I don't feel sorry for theaters because I feel theaters did it to themselves, right? Also, Netflix is going to have a big effect on this if they find success with their movies that they're starting to release. But anyway, theaters have made it so difficult to enjoy the time there, from being overpriced in certain areas, to not providing security, to not policing the people in the theater just in terms of their behavior, it's the writing on the wall. Of course this is going to happen. So I just find it very interesting. And the reason I wanted to bring it up with you today is not only to tell you that this is happening, but also to ask you, what would you do? Will you wait the 17 days to watch it from the comfort of your own home? Or is it seeing it in the theater really that important? And can you see this eventually happening to all movies? I'm just curious. And also, how would you feel if the movie theater did go the way of the bookstore and the record store? And also, as we become more and more getting things at home, how will we ever go outside? I think to go out to eat, go for a walk, go shopping, but even people do a lot of shopping online. It'll be interesting to see how someone answers that question and that desire. All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. Now, the viewer question comes from the Burner 17. And the Burner 17 says, hey Grace, I have a question. I noticed that some people online are a bit upset that some movies like Jurassic World, Furious 7, Frozen, and maybe Big Hero 6 were successful. The latter 2 more so in award season. I think he's talking about, versus How to Train Your Dragon and some of the 2D animated films. Then the Birder 17 continues saying, I've also noticed that some people tend to criticize the general audience and fans for the movie's success. What do you think is the reason for this, and why does this happen? I love your show and I watch every day. Smiley face. Well, thank you for that, the Burner 17. Much appreciated and great question. And yes, I call it being a movie snob. I think Pixels is a really great, example of that, right? Like people just not willing to, let Pixels exist. Like, I think that nobody has to like every movie, right? And I would agree with this. I would put myself in its own category. I'm not just talking about other people. I, as many of you know, disliked Frozen quite a bit, but I never begrudged its success or, said people who liked it were stupid. I was just like surprised by its success, and then I sat back and I was like, okay, well, why is this so successful? So I think that that's what would behoove anyone who scratches their head when they see these films do well. I didn't think Jurassic World was a fantastic movie. It was a solid movie, but I do understand its success. So I think that it's as I said, it's like a movie snobbery of like you shouldn't like something unless it meets like a certain criteria. But this works in both ways, because I've noticed that some people will cut a movie slack if they feel it's intellectual, even if it's not entertaining, right? I find that very odd as well. People approach movies from different directions. I've also seen people defend movies that aren't that great, saying, let's just be happy that we got a movie of our favorite characters and not criticize it. And like, that's such a weird approach, right? But as for what you're saying, I think that people just don't realize, how like the general population works, and it always happens. It's not only for movies, but for television and for politics, just everything. Shopping trends. People are like, I can't believe people shop at this store XYZ, and they don't shop at this one. And it's just the way the world works. And I think that it's not ever effective to rail against the machine, right? Like, as upset as people get about Jurassic World and Furious 7 and maybe Frozen being successful, they are successful and there's nothing you can do about it. So I think it's healthier and more productive to, accept it and try and figure out why, right? And that's what Hollywood certainly, is supposed to do. They usually get it wrong in terms of what the reasoning is behind these movies' successes. But I think that it would just behoove everyone to, realize that movies are opinion-based in terms of, the quality of said film. And as I've said before, the only concrete factors that can determine success unilaterally that everyone can agree on are box office and awards, nominations, and wins. And also, as I said, I tweeted this, I responded this to someone, I think, on a movie recently, and I said Twitter followers, like how many social media followers do you have? Those are concrete numbers that you can't argue with in every case that I just mentioned. So that's how you can, that's one of the criteria by which I judge movies here on this show, because those are the only things that I think are in black and white, right? Everything else is an opinion. And as for Pixels, I thought that was a really interesting situation where people weren't just content to say, well, I don't personally like Pixels. But the fact that, someone even wrote, like, in a comment in the review, anyone who likes Pixels, I hate you. Actually, I think that was on Movie Math the Monday after. And it was just like, why? Like, why would you, like, there's so much hate and anger in the world as it is. Are you really going to add more to the pile for Pixels? It's just like, if people enjoy a movie and it's not hurting anyone, just let them go enjoy it. What does it matter? Same with, I think 50 Shades of Grey, actually, I was going to say it's a similar situation. I don't think so. I think people got upset about that because of what they felt was the social commentary of the film and what it was, the behavior it might encourage in young women. I think people were wrong about that, but I understand where they were coming from. But with Pixels being liked by anyone isn't going to hurt anybody, so there's no reason to get angry about it. And I think that that's a really good example of what the Burner 17 is talking about. But in that case, people got so angry, and Adam Sandler had hurt his career and his reputation so much that it actually did hurt the film. But, people not liking Jurassic World, I think, people have different criteria for what they want when they go to the movie, and that's also something important to understand. Not everybody goes to the theater saying, I want a masterpiece. And although some people want that some of the time, sometimes they just want to turn their brain off and enjoy a good popcorn movie. That's the whole reason Transformers movies make money. And also, playing to different global populations, like China is a big source of income now for movies. So I would just say, I love that we have spirited discussions here on the show, but I would just say let's remove the anger from it, right? We can agree to disagree, we can change each other's minds with interesting facts, and we can just have a nice discussion about it. But I see no reason for people to get that upset about things like this. It's just too contentious, and at the end of the day, it is just a movie. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much to Burner 17. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Please write down below today's top 3 stories and that viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered on Monday, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.